Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Sunday to you. Hope you're all awake, alive, and well, and ready for a wonderful time. My name is Larry Coleman, and on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I welcome you here today. And we encourage you to be true to the truth that you know in your heart. That's whether you find inspiration for it here, in a religious tradition, in a scientific foundation, wherever you find it. I like to say, we don't have to think alike to love alike. And that's good, because we don't think I'd like to read our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge with respect that the land we're on today is the ancestral home of the Cherokee and of other indigenous peoples. The Cherokee, through stewardship, understanding, conservation, survived and continue to thrive in this land. We acknowledge their enduring connection to their homeland. You may have noticed that we don't do a lot of announcements from the front of the room anymore, so I would encourage you, there's a bulletin board right as you go outside the door, and we hang announcements there, so please take a little time after the service to take a little look at that, find out what's going on. I would ask you at this point in time to turn off, silence, or destroy your cell phone, or anything else that you have that's non-human that makes noise. We have a tradition here, and we kind of like it, I hope you do too, that anybody who's here for the first time, or maybe the second time, or hasn't been here for a while, would stand up and tell us who you are, where you're from, and let's start on this side. We always disrespect this side. Let's start on this side. Anybody new that would like to introduce themselves? And that's why we don't start on this side. Anybody on this side who is with us for the first or second or third time?
This is my wonderful daughter, Susan. I haven't been here for 2 or 3 years, and she offered to bring me.
Good to see you again. Well, thank you. Oh, no, sorry.
That's all right.
Dwayne.
Dwayne, been here a few times now. This is Susie. She came with me today. Welcome.
Welcome back. We didn't scare you off.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know, it takes courage to come into a new community for the first time. So we really appreciate you doing that and coming back for the second or third time as well. Thank you. If you have any interest in learning more about us, you'll find a little white card that looks like this, possibly in the pew, if not out in the foyer. You'll find it later, you can fill it in. We won't inundate you with stuff, but if you just indicate if you'd like to get our newsletter, whatever information you want to get, we'll get it to you so you can learn more about us. I also invite everybody to stay after service. We have a time of, I like to call it yakking and snacking. And that way you get to meet a few people, learn a little bit more about us, find out if we're the kind of people you're happy to be around. So stay for coffee hour. At this point, we're going to continue our service together. And I would like to invite Andy up to introduce you to our speaker today.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Andy. And it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Cindy Berryman-Fink to the congregation. Her resume and some of what you see in the order of service lists her accomplishments as a professor of communications at the University of Cincinnati for 3 decades, as a writer of many books and articles on reparative or restorative communications, as a consultant to organizations that need help with their internal communications and in dealing with what might be called differences within an organization, And more recently, since she and her husband Chuck, welcome Chuck, retired here 14 years ago as an active participant in the Osher Lifelong Learning Center at UNC Asheville, Ollie. And for some of you, I'm talking to you, Larry, wherever you ended up. Cindy now has a pet care business in retirement. She also they attended the UU Church, one of several in Cincinnati, for about 30 years, from 1989 to 2008. And like many UUs, she had activities and on the board and so forth, but she also sang in the choir, which makes me very happy. So she's right at home in our pulpit. Now, if you think of your life, any of our lives, as a kaleidoscopic image, in which all those pieces of the lives are in constant flux from day to day, you know how sometimes you turn the lens and the fragments all seem to fall into place. Maybe for a while, for a day, or a week, or a month, or maybe for periods of years. Everything fits together. Your life is working. You found your centered self. And one of the ways we get there is through understanding and communicating with ourselves as well as with others. And those are skills that Cindy is going to share with us today. Now, since she is in the role of the minister, well, please welcome Dr. Cindy Berryman-Fink, and she will introduce the rest of the service.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. From the fragmented world of our everyday lives, we gather together in search of wholeness. By many cares and preoccupations, by diverse and selfish aims, we are separated from one another and divided within ourselves. Yet we know that no branch is utterly severed from the tree of life that sustains us all. We cherish our oneness with those around us and the countless generations that have gone before us. We would hold fast to all of good we inherit, even as we would leave behind us the outworn and the false. We would escape from bondage to the ideas of our own day and from the delusions of our own fancy. Let us labor in hope for the dawning of a new day without hatred, without violence, without injustice. Let us nurture the growth in our own lives of the love that has shone in the lives of the greatest of women and men, the rays of whose lamps still illuminate our way. In this spirit we gather, in this spirit we pray. And if you could rise as you're willing and able for our opening hymn 148.
South and north, in universe.
585. We must sit down and reason together.
Perhaps we should sit in the dark. In the dark, we could utter our feelings.
In the dark, we could propose and describe and suggest.
In the dark, we could not see who speaks. Only the words would say what they say.
No one would speak more than twice. No one would speak less than once.
Thus saying what we feel and what we want, what we fear for ourselves and each other into the dark.
Perhaps we could begin to listen.
The women must learn to dare to speak. The men must learn to bother to listen.
The women must learn to say, I think this is so.
The men must learn to stop dancing solos on the ceiling.
After each speaks, she or he will say a ritual phrase.
It is not I who speaks, but the wind. The wind blows through me. Long after me is the wind.
This is the time.
Microphone.
This is the time in our service when we invite you to come forward and express a joy or concern or a celebration in your life. And we ask that you keep it to the point and brief. So, Diana, we'll go to family for each other.
Hi, my name
Hold on.
Is it on now? Whoa. Hi, my name is Rochelle, and I have a joy to share. Yesterday, a team of dedicated congregants from the UU gathered together to host a very successful yard sale all morning yesterday. Our fearless leader, Susan Hurley, had incredible resilience to manage this huge team of people who we want to thank today. All of the folks who tore up this sanctuary and put everything up here and laid out places for them to do their work and categorizing and tagging and for sale and putting, the folks who put stuff out, for all the folks who helped us put everything back, helped load people's cars, helped take the stuff that didn't sell, to Goodwill, etc. As you see our tree lawn, we had to bring some things back because Goodwill wouldn't take all of the furniture, but the community helped themselves to it for free, and we were very successful. We raised about $2,700. So thank you for all who did the work and for all who donated. Thank you very much.
When I first met my wife, I'm Evan. When I first met my wife almost 20 years ago, I had a business card from her and it said Pilates. And I was like, what is Pilate? And she had to describe to me what Pilates is as a method of working out. And so she's been a Pilates instructor our whole relationship. And this weekend, I just finished up her teacher training program so that I can become a Pilates teacher.
Diane, if you will light a candle for all those who, for whatever reason, chose not to come forward. We acknowledge your joys and concerns, and especially those who have no ability to speak for themselves. I met Cindy and her husband Chuck through the Ethical Humanist Society of Asheville. That's where we first encountered each other. So I thought it would be appropriate to lead our meditation today by drawing on the writings of an ethical humanist leader, George Beauchamp, who was the leader of the Ethical Culture Society in Washington, D.C. The most necessary of all faiths is a faith in people. I'm speaking not of blind faith, but of a faith that each individual can select their own aims better than any other person can select for them. Not faith that people will be wise, for people are often foolish, but faith that people at their best are capable of wisdom, and that they can be taught to be wiser than they are. Not faith that people will be good, for people are sometimes wicked, but faith that people can be inspired to greater goodness and compassion. Not faith that people will always be strong and brave, for the best of people are often weak, but faith that people are capable of strength, and through faith in the potentialities of people comes multiplied strength and genuine firmness. Not faith that our knowledge and wisdom will convince others to adopt our opinions, but faith that through speaking honestly and listening respectfully, people can hear and learn from one another. Not faith that people are wise or good or brave or strong, but that they are capable of becoming wise enough and good enough, brave enough and strong enough to make a habitable and enjoyable and better world together. As Michael says, now as our minds and hearts are one, let us give ourselves to the eloquence of silence. May it be so. And now that the work of this congregation may continue and flourish in the community, despite having a successful fundraiser yesterday, we rely on your generosity and your kindness to support us. So we will now lift the offering.
3, break not the circle. I thank you very much for having me here today. It's wonderful to be in a UU congregation again. As Andy said, Chuck and I were 30 years in the Cincinnati congregation and loved it very, very much. We raised our 2 sons as UUs, and they even went to visit UUA in Boston, and I've been able to attend GA. So it's great to be home. I'm sorry that I'm missing Reverend Michael Carter today. He and I taught a class together maybe 6 or 7 years ago at Raleigh on dialogue about race. And I really enjoy getting to know him. I hadn't known him before, and working together on the class. So I'm sorry to miss him today, but I'm happy to be here in his place. We have a communication problem in our country. Increasingly, we're not communicating with each other, and that's for 2 major reasons: social isolation and divisiveness. Let me first talk about social isolation. Many people no longer know their neighbors, or they might be feuding with their neighbors. Many people are working from home now, so they're not chatting face-to-face at work, they're not having lunch or coffee with coworkers. And sadly, many teenagers are not dating, many do not have summer jobs, and many are not joining school activities. We probably know that participation in civic organizations, hobby-related groups, and faith-based organizations has plummeted. Not too long ago, I read about an older woman who left a handwritten note in a neighbor's mailbox asking, "Will you be my friend?" Oh. Heartbreaking. I have a friend here who delivers Meals on Wheels to seniors. And she said for most of the people, she's the only person they ever see or talk to in a given day. The Surgeon General of the U.S., Dr. Murphy, recently issued an 82-page report entitled "Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation: Advice on the Healing Effects of Social Connection and Community." According to data, 1 in 2 adults report experiencing loneliness. 1 in 2, half of us. That's 50% of the population, and not just older people. To quote from the Surgeon General's report, "It is a serious problem associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death." My comment: we get seriously ill and we can die from loneliness. To go back to the quote, "The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day and even greater than that associated with obesity and physical inactivity. And the harmful consequences of a society that lacks social connection can be felt in our schools, in our workplaces, in our civic organizations, where performance, productivity, and engagement are diminished. Unquote. The report does provide many solutions, one of which is to improve our communication with each other. Again, to quote from the report, we need to cultivate values of kindness, respect, service, and commitment to one another. The informal practices of everyday life, the norms of culture of how we engage one another, significantly influence social connection. Let me now turn to the topic of divisiveness. Many family members and friends have serious arguments or are not even talking to each other because of political differences. More and more, our communication is characterized by dogmatism, self-righteousness, and blame. We are a people isolated, divided, and angry. Many people refuse to have any relationship with people who differ from them politically. I have many friends who are aghast that Chuck and I travel occasionally with a couple who are conservative Republicans, even though we are liberal Democrats. My friends say, how can you do that? How can you spend a weekend with them? What do you talk about? Why do you even like them? How can you still be your friends? We've known this couple for 35 years. We love them, and the four of us have worked out ways to be together in friendship. The New York Times did an article on political divisiveness in October of 2022. It said that 25% of Americans have often or have sometimes ended a relationship with someone because of differing political views. People across the ideological spectrum told similar stories of estrangement, conversations broken off with siblings and children, decades-long friendships that have gone quiet. It's really heartbreaking to think that some sisters and brothers, parents and children no longer talk to each other, no longer even have relationships because of political differences and divisiveness. The good news is that over 90% of people say it is important to try to reduce divisiveness. This is according to a USA Today poll done in 2021. So we're being told that improving the quality and the amount of our communication with each other is crucial. As a former professor of communication for 31 years, I have known this, and I'm now delighted that issues of communication are coming to national attention. So that's been the bad news. Let's offer some hope, some possibilities, some good news. I want to offer a concept, a strategy called restorative practice as a way to rebuild community and to strengthen community with anybody, with friends, with family, with neighbors, with coworkers, with anyone with whom we have ongoing relationships. Maybe you've heard the term restorative justice. It is based on the same principles as restorative practice, but restorative justice is used in areas where there's crime, offenders, and victims. Restorative practice is broader and can be used in any context. Restorative practice is grounded in principles of respect, empathy, responsibility, and community building. It's a type of communication that helps us to address disagreements, to deal with hurt feelings, harm, or to deal with conflict. It's a strategy to promote healing and accountability and repair in relationships. Listening and seeing the humanity of one another is at the core of restorative practice. The purpose of restorative practice is to create a very safe and supportive space for individuals to communicate and to understand the impact of their actions, take responsibility for how we might have hurt someone or harmed someone, and make amends with those who have been affected. And it's wonderful, it's interesting and wonderful that this type of communication, restorative practice, fits so well with several of the UU principles. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relationships, acceptance of one another. So restorative practice really can help us to put into action these three UU principles. Let me describe how restorative practice works. Any group of people, let's say a family or a friendship group, a group of neighbors, a congregation, or smaller committees within a church, agree to regularly meet for restorative practice. But before the meetings begin, there's a training session, and there's online training, or you could bring in someone in communication to training. But first there's a training session where practices of loving and supportive communication are developed, because we don't inherently always know how to communicate in this way, so there's the training session. These are the communication goals to develop before you begin restorative practice sessions. You have to learn to listen with an open mind, decrease judgments of others, look for shared values, avoid labels and stereotypes by focusing on the individual, find compromise and common ground, seek out diverse perspectives, focus on solutions to problems, and practice empathy. And that's quite a list. All of those are much easier said than done. Much easier than said than done. We take communication for granted. I know in the years I taught communication, or students would major in communication, people would say, teach, well, what's there to teach? You know, once you learn to talk, you communicate. There's a whole degree in that. You study that for 4 years to get a degree in that? Yes, because it's very complicated. These things are not easy. So together as groups of friends or family members, neighbors, congregants, we must continually work toward this style of communication, and we have to do it with patience and with grace. Imagine if we had these 8 principles I just talked about in mind regularly, on paper or on our phone, that we could think about and look at and practice regularly, how much better our communication would be, and conflict can be reduced. So after the training sessions, the group that wants to do restorative practice schedules regular meetings to do that. Now, it could be monthly, it could be quarterly, as often as you might want to meet. Restorative conversations take place in a circle, and this practice has its roots in indigenous culture. So everyone sits in a circle, and the circle lets us see everyone as equals, all working toward the same goal and connecting and hearing each other. And we can have eye contact with everyone when we're in a circle also. The other thing that's borrowed from an indigenous cultures is the use of a talking piece. It could be anything at all that you pass along. It could be a ball, a toy, a stick. It's really any item that represents that the person holding it has the floor to speak and everyone else is listening. So anyone can open up about something that concerns them, about something that has hurt them, about something they would like to see changed. So the conversation, restorative practice conversations, are really a type of problem solving, whether it be big or tiny issues that you want to work on and solve. Each person seeks to practice both self-awareness and awareness of the other. So on self-awareness, these are the kinds of things we would want to ask ourselves to try to develop self-awareness. What's going on in my heart right now? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling that? How am I inclined to respond to others in this circle? And if I'm inclined to respond in some hurtful, harmful, negative ways, what could I do or say instead? And for the other awareness part of it, we need to ask these kinds of questions. How am I affecting others? What do others here seem to be feeling? What do they seem to need? How can I demonstrate genuine love, genuine caring, or forgiveness? So I've been talking kind of generally here. Let me share a couple of examples of how restorative practice could have improved communication and strengthened certain communities. This first example I want to give is related to a homeowners association that Chuck and I were in for 22 years. He's shaking his head, yeah, I didn't like that homeowners association. There were 15 houses, and we were on a wooded hillside, in a wooded hillside neighborhood. So what the neighbors had to do collectively was to take care of the one road up the hill. We had to have it plowed in the snowy Ohio winters, and we had to have it repaired or paved as needed. Then there were common trees and some common fencing, bushes, and mailboxes that had to be maintained. So all the neighbors paid monthly dues administered by a volunteer treasurer. And the problem was, where we could have used restorative practice, is that our quarterly meetings pretty early on, and for the 22 years we were there, were regularly dominated by two families. And those two families not so subtly insisted that their views carried more weight than others. When there was a disagreement, they would say things like, well, we've lived here the longest. We know the neighborhood the best. It was like these four folks were in charge, and other neighbors did not have voice. We voted on decisions, and many neighbors quickly learned not to oppose Mike, Susie, Jim, or Lila. I can say that because it's in Cincinnati, and none of you know Mike, Susie, Jim, or Lila. Many of us were frustrated by what was supposed to be group decision-making and democratic processes that were not being followed. But no one spoke up publicly at the meetings because we hadn't established a process, a habit, a norm of communicating about issues we wanted to improve upon. So no one spoke up publicly at the meetings, but there was plenty of complaining behind the scenes. You know that, Chuck. We were among the complainers. So we had not set up a system to communicate about our communication. This is called meta-communication. It's important all the time in all relationships to communicate about your communication. Restorative practice sets aside time, space, and agreement to do just that. If we had used restorative practice from time to time in this neighborhood group to share our feelings and reactions about the homeowners association, how it was functioning or should have been functioning, we could have been honest with each other and lovingly asked for change. We wouldn't have had to call out anyone by name. We wouldn't have to get angry. We wouldn't have to blame. Instead, we would just ask at a restorative practice session that all voices be heard, all opinions be respected, all homeowners be treated equally. And when that wasn't happening, you could say, you know, in our last meeting, everyone's voice wasn't heard. We're not feeling that we're equals here. How can we make sure we're all equals? So you don't have to argue about it. You just ask for change. And because we would have been through some training, people hopefully can accept that with grace and humility and manage to change. So if we could have listened empathically and have taken responsibility, those self-appointed voices in charge perhaps could have adjusted their style. It might not have happened immediately, but over time, it probably would have gotten better. Then it would have been a stronger and more loving neighborhood community rather than a community that was divided into coalitions. We could have been a closer knit community with neighbors helping each other in tough times and truly enjoying each other's company. Isn't that what we really should want and do want in our neighborhood communities? Instead, we had some divisiveness and we had some social isolation where people didn't get together. Another example concerns a women's group that I'm currently in, and I've been a part of for over 5 years now. There's 9 of us women, ranging in age from 67 to 87. We get together once a month, though we used to meet twice monthly. We alternate meetings between socializing, just chit-chatting, having fun together, or at the next month having a meeting where we discuss a topic that's selected and we get ahead of time to think about. There's a schedule of who hosts each meeting by either selecting the topic or bringing the snacks for that meeting. The topics are personal, where we self-disclose. We open up and we self-disclose. We've discussed, for example, the question of what qualities do you admire in yourself and what qualities do you dislike in yourself? Some heavy topics. Another question we once discussed was describe the worst job you've ever had and how you coped with it. So we learn about each other, we learn about ourselves, and we learn about each other through these topics. On the discussion topics, we first do a brief check-in of what's happened in our lives since we met a month ago. And the host is supposed to be the timekeeper for these two parts of the meeting, the check-in and the topic discussion. For quite a while now, several years actually, two members of our group dominate, completely dominate. Whether it's the social meeting, the check-in, or the topic discussion. The hosts rarely manage the time that they're supposed to be managing. There have been some meetings where we run, some of the discussion topic meetings, where we run out of time completely, and a couple of members do not even get a chance to contribute to the topic at all. They don't even get heard on the topic. So imagine you drive 20 minutes or 30 minutes to get together once a month to discuss a topic. People dominate, people talk about themselves, go on and on. No one's managing the process, and two people don't even get to be heard. Lately, more and more women are missing meetings, and the warmth and the camaraderie and the commitment we once had with each other clearly seems to be declining. If we had been using restorative practice, and maybe we will, maybe I will suggest we do that. If we had been using restorative practice, part of each, maybe second or third meeting, just part of it, could have been devoted to sharing our feelings about the group. We could talk about the hurt and wrongdoing of leaving some women out completely because time got away from us. We need to talk about the need to respect others by not monopolizing the conversation. Again, we don't have to call on anyone by name, we don't have to blame, we don't have to say, well, you really took too much time, how dare you. We just talk about the process, is it going the way it should? We're not giving voice to everyone. Some people aren't heard at all. We really need to do better here. Again, we all need to do better, not you need to. And how can we improve this? How can we do better? We could share our sadness that the commitment to each other seems to be declining. Now again, these are not easy things to say or hear. Maybe that's why we haven't done it yet. But if we had developed a shared agreement to being aware of oneself and aware of others, we could be communicating openly and lovingly without blame and with a collective desire to repair our group. I honestly don't know if this friendship group is going to survive. I feel very sad about our possible demise, but I sense that some other women are happy to be done with the group. It seems to be dying. But I find that very sad because when you look at our ages, 67 to 87, sustaining a community of friends is crucial to overcoming the social isolation I talked about before, and the social isolation that often accompanies people as they age. So let us think about overcoming loneliness, overcoming social isolation, overcoming divisiveness in our society, in our lives. Let us build communities and create social connections through these vulnerable conversations. By creating spaces and time where open dialogue is safe and encouraged, we can deepen our understanding of one another, we can work together to address challenges, and we can find the support that we all need to navigate tough times. I will ask, are there groups in your lives that could benefit from better listening, shared values, common ground, and empathy? Of course, we all have groups in which we can benefit from that. Think about whether restorative practice can build a stronger community here at this church, here in this congregation. Let me end with a quote from the author and speaker I greatly admire, Brene Brown. Quote, "Connection is the energy that exists between people when we feel seen, heard, and valued, when we can give and receive without judgment, when we can derive sustenance and strength from each other." right, now we'll do the closing hymn. Now, if we could stand as you're unable to do closing hymn 121, We'll Build the Land.
Go free, where the world of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a land that can be. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may create peace, where justice shall roll down the waters and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and give them garments instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, bring and create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land, we'll make our nation's cities, raise up millions, nations from old, restoring ruins of generations. Oh, we'll build a land of people so bold. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, make and create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come build a land where mantles of praises resound from spirits once vain and once weak, where colors of righteousness stand our people. Oh, thou build a land my people receive. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, bring and create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference, we forgive ourselves and each other, and we begin again in love. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible, we forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause, we forgive ourselves and each other, and we begin again in love. For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others, we forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone, we forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit, we forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. For losing sight of our unity, we forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness, we forgive ourselves and each other, we begin again in love.